Sexual slavery is a particular form of enslavement which includes limitations on one's autonomy, freedom of movement and power to decide matters relating to one's sexual activity. Thus, the crime also includes forced marriages, domestic servitude, or other forced labor that ultimately involves forced sexual activity. In contrast to the crime of rape, which is a completed offense, sexual slavery constitutes a continuing offense. Forms of sexual slavery can, for example, be practices such as the detention of women in rape camps or comfort stations, forced temporary marriages to soldiers and other practices involving the treatment of women as chattel. Child prostitution usually manifests in the form of sex trafficking, in which a child is kidnapped or tricked into becoming involved in the sex trade, or survival sex, in which the child engages in sexual activities to procure basic essentials such as food and shelter. Prostitution of children is commonly associated with child pornography, and they often overlap. Some people travel to foreign countries to engage in child sex tourism. Research suggests that there may be as many as 10 million children involved in prostitution worldwide. The practice is most widespread in South America and Asia, but prostitution of children exists globally, in undeveloped countries as well as developed. Most of the children involved with prostitution are girls, despite an increase in the number of young boys in the trade. The elite of this world have been accused of participating in this gruesome abuse, most notably Jeffrey Epstein.
Prince Andrew answering questions for the first time about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein and accusations of sexual abuse, all in a no-holds-barred interview with the BBC. This morning, Prince Andrew breaking his silence about the teenager in this 2001 photo, who says in court papers she was forced by Jeffrey Epstein to have sex with the prince. The prince claiming in an exclusive interview with the BBC he doesn't remember meeting her.
I have no recollection of ever meeting this lady. None whatsoever.
You don't remember meeting her?
No.
Virginia Roberts Giuffre, now a 35-year-old mother, says British socialite Ghislaine Maxwell recruited her when she was 16, then groomed her to become Epstein's teenage sex slave. In court filings in a defamation case against Maxwell, Giuffre claimed Epstein ordered her to have sex with some of his powerful friends, including, on 3 occasions, Prince Andrew, in London, at Epstein's home in New York, and on his private Caribbean island.
He knows exactly what he's done, and I hope he comes clean about it.
But now, the prince addressing his long relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, even after the financier was convicted of soliciting prostitution from a minor in 2008 and was a registered sex offender. The prince, seen in this video obtained by the Daily Mail, appearing in the doorway of Epstein's home.
The problem was the fact that once he had been convicted,
You stayed with him.
I stayed with him. And that's the bit that as it were, I kick myself for on a daily basis, because it was not something that was becoming of a member of the royal family. And we try and uphold the highest standards and practices, and I let the side down. Simple as that.
Epstein died of an apparent suicide in jail awaiting trial for...
Welcome back to CBS This Morning. The woman accused of helping alleged sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein recruit and abuse underage girls is in jail this morning. FBI agents arrested Ghislaine Maxwell yesterday, nearly 1 year to the day after Epstein was arrested. She faces 6 charges, including illegally transporting minors and perjury. Epstein killed himself in a federal detention center in New York City last August while awaiting trial. And Mola Lenghi has been following the Epstein case for a long time now. Mola, good morning. It's been about 24 hours since this news broke of Ghislaine Maxwell's arrest. What are Epstein's accusers now saying about it?
Well, Tony, one woman I spoke with says the word that keeps coming up to describe this arrest is finally. You know, for years, Ghislaine Maxwell has denied allegations that she helped Jeffrey Epstein run his alleged sex trafficking operation from right here, his Manhattan mansion, among other places. And despite detailed allegations against Maxwell, she's never been charged. Until now.
The FBI took Ghislaine Maxwell into custody Thursday morning at this home in New Hampshire. The indictment alleges Maxwell helped Jeffrey Epstein recruit, groom, and ultimately abuse underage girls. The youngest alleged victim was 14.
Lengthy prison sentences have been handed down to a couple who sold their son to paedophiles on the dark web for sex. A 48-year-old woman, identified as Berin T, was jailed for 12 years and 6 months. Her 39-year-old partner, the boy's stepfather, identified as Christian L, was given 12 years. Across a period between May 2015 and August 2017, the couple were found guilty of rape, aggravated sexual assault of children, forced prostitution, and distribution of child pornography.
Put his hand on my thigh.
Central Texas children being lured in by criminals.
They gave me a weird-looking pill. I took it.
I think the worst part was when we found her and I realized what had happened.
A threat you never imagined so close to.
Allegations at a state mental institution. Good evening, I'm Rob Johnson.
And I'm Erica Sargent. A former social worker at the facility in Elgin is accused of using an inmate there as a sex slave.
CBS 2's Dorothy Tucker reports on a sordid case that's now a federal lawsuit.
Attorneys for 24-year-old Ben Hurt say much of the last 3 years of his life were spent as a personal sex slave for this woman, 53-year-old Christy Linhart.
She is accused of manipulating and seducing our client repeatedly, and it took her about 4 months until she actually had sex for the first time with him.
The abuse, according to a lawsuit, took place at the Elgin Mental Health Center, where Hurt was a patient and Linhart was his trusted social worker.
We have evidence of her perversion, both in her emails to the client, nude photos.
I didn't fully understand what I was getting into until I got into it.
Glenn County Sheriff's Office warning parents, really be aware of what your kids are doing online, especially during this time in quarantine. This after an online sting operation ended with multiple warrants across Texas and a group of men arrested. 6 News reporter Cole Johnson explains for us tonight.
During the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of us are spending more time on our computers, our phones, really any way to stay connected. And because of that, the McLennan County Sheriff's Office launched an online sting, ending with 20 arrest warrants and these 18 men behind bars.
This online operation started in April and ended up with 20 warrants across Texas and reaching out of the state. Officials say the 2 not in custody should be turning themselves in within the next 24 hours. Officials say the suspects could be facing charges of attempt to pay for sex with children or manufacturing child pornography to distribute to the individuals. This isn't the first time in our area that we've seen online stings result in arrests. Back in March, a 50-year-old sent graphic photos to who he thought was a 16-year-old girl, but was actually an undercover detective. He was arrested at a Woodway Park. And back in November of 2019 in Coppers Cove, 6 men were arrested in an online predator sting.
The FBI said Monday it recovered nearly 170 children under age 18 in sex trafficking stings across the country last week in a long-running program known as Operation Cross Country.
This past week's operation included 106 cities. Police rescued 168 children and arrested 281 suspects on charges related to sexual exploitation of children.
The most children were recovered from the Denver area with 18 rescued. The most pimps were arrested in the Phoenix area with 21.
Agents said today the pimps are using the children at sporting events, conferences, and in hotels. They said some of the tips came from travelers in hotels who noticed some strange behavior.
The campaign targeted truck stops, casinos, and websites that advertise dating or escort services, as well as areas with a large number of strip clubs and pornography stores.
Say this was a real-life house of horrors. The crimes reportedly happened last year, but the 2 parents were just in court this week, and now we're taking you inside the case. NBC Charlotte's Alex Shabbat has been digging into the disturbing details. He's in Kings Mountain tonight with the latest.
Well, I was able to get copies of the arrest warrants which detail these horrific allegations involving everything from children locked in a basement to sex crimes. What Kings Mountain police say they uncovered while investigating this home.
Bad thing to hear in this community.
It's something even neighbors who've been around the area for a while have never heard of and hope they never will again.
I've been living here 31 years and we never had nothing like that going on.
According to court documents, 57-year-old David Wolfington locked 2 children in a basement without adequate food or water. And he's accused of raping one of the victims, a 15-year-old girl, and keeping her for sexual servitude. 38-year-old Loretta Wolfington was charged with several counts of aiding and abetting.
Accused of running a child sex trafficking ring through Jacksonville, chooses to go to trial instead of taking a plea deal. It's a far-reaching case involving child prostitution in Jacksonville, Houston, and New Orleans.
Erwin Burley facing federal charges of child sex trafficking, transportation for prostitution, and enticing children. Channel 4's Eric Avenier looked into these horrific allegations.
According to these indictment papers, the case against Erwin Burley began last July when an underage victim contacted police about how he lured her into prostitution, working in Jacksonville, Houston, and New Orleans. News4Jack's crime and safety analyst Gil Smith says the girls involved often don't know what they're getting into.
Since they're young and impressionable, they're able to convince them that they can provide a better life for them. They have no idea that they are about to enter into a life of prostitute.
The story of sexual slavery is not enough to hold the people she says are responsible. 4 people suspected of holding that Spokane woman captive for a year and forcing her to work as a prostitute have all been released from jail.
Jeff Humphrey broke the story on KXLY.com. Jeff, how come there were no charges ever filed in this case?
Well, prosecutors don't feel they have enough evidence, at least not yet. Their alleged victim has become a reluctant witness, and in the end it came down to her word against 4 suspects who adamantly deny ever holding her captive.
Last week, the alleged victim went to the public safety building and told sheriff's deputies she'd been held against her will inside the Spokane Valley home, driven to nearby hotels, and forced to perform sex, sometimes at gunpoint.
All the facts that she's provided, all the information that she's provided to our investigators, it's all matched up.
The 21-year-old also told investigators that she had seen other young women in the basement of this Nora home as well. Based on the information that more people may be at risk, detectives got a warrant, raided the residence, and took 4 people into custody, including this man, Christopher Foster.
Why the fuck you lying? Why you always lying? Oh my God, stop your fucking lying.
Can't hear me.
A DeBerry teenager who survived months of child sex trafficking and forced drug use at the hands of her own parents is speaking out in hopes of the men who did this to her, and prosecutors say raped her will receive a harsh sentence.
We first told you about the arrest of Michael and Cynthia Graves back in 2014, and since then, investigative reporter Carla Ray found out between the 2 of them, they were only sentenced to 6 years.
Though she's but an unnamed victim in court records.
I want to feel safe in my own community, and I want justice.
Now at 18, this former child sex slave wants her story to be heard in and out of court.
I do feel cheated out of justice. That's why I want to speak out now, and I want the truth to be known.
Mikkel Ware was born Mikkel Graves, the daughter of Michael and Cynthia, who investigators say sold her to men for sex in exchange for drug money.
And when you're a kid, you automatically want to trust your parents. And that's what I did, is I trusted them.
Inside this home, agents say the girl's parents injected her with painkillers, and her mother arranged appointments with men, including former restaurant owner Bob Richards, who allegedly paid to have sex with her for months. He died before he could be prosecuted.
I've been tied up, handcuffed. It was like I was in constant danger.
These men all knew you were a teenager?
Yes.
Despite the horror, Michael Graves struck a plea deal on child abuse charges and served just 1 year behind bars. And through a deal of her own, Cynthia Graves was given just 5 years in prison for sex crimes involving a minor. Prosecutors admit if she had gone to trial, she faced 25 years.
It's like a slap in the face. Without a second thought, she sold me to all these men.
And though this teen wasn't able to influence the sentence for her parents, she hopes for harsher punishment against one of those men.
2016-1036.
This man, John Zalosi, was identified 2 years after prosecutors say he paid to have sex with the teen. He's fighting charges of lewd and lascivious molestation and paying a minor for sex.
I want to feel like this last guy will actually have to pay for what he's done to me.
Mikkel told us she's only able to speak about this today due to the love and support she's gotten from her new mom, Holly. She was by her side in court as well. That accused John is set for a pre-trial.
The numbers tell the story. In one day, 103 suspected human traffickers arrested in 117 different locations, with raids carried out by some 1,200 police officers from more than a dozen countries. A success for the European Union's law enforcement agency, Europol.
This type of crime is impossible to be tackled on national level because the criminals, they have created networks all over Europe and in other countries. And only if you bring together all this information, for instance at Europol, and you provide the investigators with a whole picture of the criminal group, it is possible to efficiently investigate.
What began in Austria and Hungary, these two countries noticed a surge in trafficking, so they launched a police operation in September 2011. More than a year later, it had grown to include 10 other neighboring countries. What were they focusing on? A human trafficking network in Kosovo. That's where it was centered, but with links to organized crime in Turkey. And this specific group focused on vulnerable people in war-torn countries, especially Syria, but also Iraq and Libya. In fact, one of the ringleaders of the group, based in Germany, was actually also a Syrian national. Now, how did they bring people across overland from Turkey into the Western Balkans and the EU, but also there are apparently accounts of people coming through by boat, coming in through Greece and moving north. All of these incredibly dangerous journeys. These photos from Europol show how they were smuggled, stuffed into cramped hiding spaces inside trains, buses, boats, and trucks for hours at a time. In a year of operations, 891 smuggling incidents were recorded. At least 7,500 illegal migrants were intercepted.
Suspected child sex traffickers lured two teen boys to a St. Pete trailer park with video games, online apps, and the promise of a puppy.
I-Team investigator Adam Walster uncovers new details about this case and what you need to know to protect your kids.
That's Mark and that's Andy. They put on a good front.
Mary Homerding never suspected her neighbors were child sex traffickers.
They were always polite. They even joked around.
Because they would run by in the golf cart and wave.
Nobody in this quiet 55 and older mobile home park suspected a group of 6 men had been keeping 2 teen boys in this trailer starting in 2017.
They were really nice, you know, that's what the shocking part is.
Neighbors said they were surprised the men got away with it for so long because the boys were being held in that blue trailer just a few feet away from the neighborhood trash containers, which many of the residents of this 600-unit complex use multiple times a week.
I've never seen the kids.
Yeah, as many times I went to the garbage can because they live right across from the garbage can. I never heard anything, never seen anything out of order.
Police say the men in the trailer and another woman in north central Florida used video games and online apps like Omegle, Roblox, and Discord to find and communicate with their victims.
The majority of people playing games are boys, and that's how our boys are lured in.
A 2016 study funded by the U.S. Department of Justice estimates 36% of child sex trafficking victims are boys. The first victim was a 16-year-old boy from Marion County.
The teenage victim in this case was lured away from his family with promises of a better life. Instead, he was moved into a filthy trailer and used as a sex slave for nearly a year.
The boy first met these 2 men, Mark Dennis and Andrew Clements, at their 2017 wedding. Police say he was brought to the wedding by a family friend, Eleanor McGlamory, who was charged with conspiracy in the case. Dennis and Clements immediately started texting the boy using Discord and picked him up at his home 140 miles away 3 weeks later. Police say they disabled his cell phone so he couldn't be tracked, then gave him a new name, birthday, and backstory.
And the kid was polite. He seemed happy.
Homerding says she only saw the boy once, riding a golf cart with Clements.
He introduced him as his adopted son, and the boy agreed.
Did you think it was odd that you didn't see him for months and months after that?
Well, I figured it didn't work out.
People are so busy that they go about their life and they don't always look at clues or look at signs that something could be wrong.
Police say Dennis, Clements, their roommates Curtis Gruwell and Michael Schwartz, and associates Michael Blasdell and J.R. Gauthier were involved in the trafficking ring. They say 4 of the 6 men repeatedly raped the boy inside.
Just this morning, the last of the 7 suspects wanted in connection with a human trafficking case involving 2 teenage boys was taken into custody by authorities. The St. Petersburg Police Department telling us that they have 34-year-old Curtis Gruwell after he turned himself in earlier this morning, and detectives spent the entire morning interviewing him. Gruwell faces charges of conspiracy to commit human trafficking and interference with custody. Just over an hour ago, Gruwell was transferred from here to the Pinellas County Jail, and we asked him if he had anything to say about his actions.
Anything you'd say to those kids?
I up. I thought I was with good people.
What would you say to your parents right now?
They should probably shoot me.
Otherwise, shoot this motherfucker and let us take our fraternity of assassins to heights reserved only for the gods of men.
In response to studies that reveal Ohio is ranked 5th in the country in reported cases of human trafficking, Bill Holland, an inspector with the Summit County Sheriff's Office, is spearheading an investigation that targets the traffickers.
People don't really realize the psychological hold that the traffickers have over these victims. They just do not feel that they can leave.
Inspector Holland says officers have been posing as customers on websites that offer sex for sale, and then agree to meet prostitutes at various locations in Northeast Ohio. During one undercover operation in Northfield last week, a team of police officers arrested 18 people on various prostitution-related charges. Among them, 35-year-old Jose Garcia of Lorain, who is charged with promoting prostitution. But the real goal of the operation is to identify those who were involved in the sex trade that have been forced into it.
Either through
Watch out.
The crime scene was dark and unimaginable. A young woman with a chain around her neck kept as a sex slave inside of an isolated storage container.
What, are you okay? Just a girl. Just a girl, just a girl.
I remember asking her, I'm like, who are you?
What's your name?
Here's this girl chained up like a dog
And my neck's attached to the wall up here.
in the back of a container. Did I just step into Hollywood on a movie set?
This bizarre and frightening story began Labor Day weekend, 2016, when 30-year-old Kayla Brown and her 32-year-old boyfriend, Charles David Carver, went missing near Spartanburg, South Carolina.
Do you know where your buddy is?
Charlie?
Yes.
He shot him.
She told the police that she saw Todd Kolop shoot her boyfriend, Charlie Carver.
After her rescue, Kayla was rushed from the scene into an ambulance.
Red pepper.
There, she began talking about her 2-month imprisonment at the hands of Todd Kolop.
What did Todd do while you were there?
He would get there with me at 1 and 3 o'clock every day, take me up to the main building, feed me, make me do whatever he wanted sexually, and then he'd put me back in the building.
Kayla survived her ordeal, but 7 others who encountered Todd Kolop did not. And in hours of candid confessions, he detailed those murders for police.
Shot him twice in the chest. Okay. He dropped forward. I went around him and put another one through his spinal column.
These confessions of a serial killer's journey into darkness sometimes border on the surreal.
My golf game was weak. My kill game is strong.
This weekend, the San Francisco Bay Area could see as much as an $800 million boost to its local economy thanks to Super Bowl 50. There is, however, a darker side to that boost in the business of human trafficking, a $32 billion a year industry that some reports indicate sees an uptick during major events like the Super Bowl. Congresswoman Kristi Noem and Congresswoman Barbara Comstock are fighting to expose this dirty little secret, and join us now. How did the human trafficking industry get to be as high as a $32 billion industry, and yet we don't hear much about it at all?
You know, historically, human trafficking has always been around. I think they saw a real grow in the amount of dollars that are included in the industry by the invention and usage of the internet. Online websites knowingly advertising children and adults for sex has become a business that we've had difficulty fighting in the past. And we were able to last year finally pass legislation that would stop these websites from knowingly being able to advertise children for sex. And so we're making some ground in putting protections in place. But I really think that's what added to the boom, was that access that anyone could get online and certainly get the kind of results that they.
We have more information this afternoon on how widespread sex trafficking was during the Super Bowl.
The Minneapolis police sergeant who headed up a sting years in the making is releasing new numbers. Susan Elizabeth Littlefield breaks down specifics.
Kim, from Washington County to Bloomington, officers all around the metro had a plan. It was headed up by Minneapolis police. Today, they announced they were successful in curbing sex trafficking during Super Bowl week. Human trafficking is a modern-day slavery. Most often, it involves sex trafficking, where victims are used or sold for sex against their will. Metro officers knew that the Super Bowl could potentially be a busy time for buyers of this type thing. They made 94 arrests. Most of them were men between 21 and 50 years old. Officers recovered 28 potential victims in person. Now, those victims, they were from 17 to 49 years old. 14 of those victims from Minnesota, 14 from out of state. They were all offered help.
5:15 a.m., and Operation Dark Night is living up to its name. In South Savannah and a half dozen other communities in 4 states, more than 100 federal officers head out to hit 16 different sites at exactly the same time. That's critical because authorities believe all of the locations are linked. Agents hope to take down an entire alleged sex slave network in a single blow, 25 minutes from now.
When it comes down to going in, they'll be focused. Especially a case like this where they're hoping to rescue someone.
Because the case involves suspected human trafficking of women, mainly from Mexico and Nicaragua, it was fast-tracked over 6 months. An alphabet soup of agencies take part: Homeland Security, ICE, FBI, IRS, DEA, local authorities, even the U.S. Coast Guard.
The transportation took place, correct?
The entire operation coordinated from the 8th floor of a downtown Savannah office building.
There's some anticipation, the adrenaline flows, and you're really hoping that everybody that you have out there is safe.
The teams strike at exactly 6 a.m.
So the entry teams have already gone in.
All new at 4, 5 people from Anderson County face charges in a sex trafficking case involving children. The sheriff called the crimes, quote, sick and despicable. Court documents show indictments for human trafficking and child pornography. The crimes go back to the beginning of last year, and the Anderson County Sheriff says he was disturbed discussing the details of this case.
Fox Carolina's Jarvis Robertson with the story.
This is a very, this is a tough case.
A case that the sheriff says involves minors being sex trafficked and child pornography. Federal officials say these 5 suspects from Anderson were taken into custody and charged back in April. We told you about these 2, Gary Garland and Shannon Garland, who were both charged with sexual exploitation of a minor, first degree, and a host of other charges.
Every day you see all sorts of people from all walks of life. Lovebirds, loudmouths, moaners, slaves, chatterboxes, partygoers, arguing couples. Modern slaves can be hard to spot. Demand for cheap goods, cheap labour and cheap sex has created the perfect storm for human trafficking. In the UK, it's estimated there are nearly 13,000 women and men being forced into a life they didn't ask for, with more people being discovered every day. You've probably come into contact with them without ever realising. There can be some telltale signs. Sometimes they might be physical. They look uneasy, unkempt or malnourished, or have untreated injuries. Sometimes the signs can be less obvious, like someone paying for their travel or speaking for them. Maybe they're picked up and dropped off from work at unusual times and aren't sure of their own address. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. So please help us help them. If you suspect slavery is happening, contact the Modern Slavery Line. Or if a victim needs support, call the Salvation Army and play a part to help stamp it out.
Teenage girls charged with a shocking crime, running a prostitution ring, enslaving young girls out of this Ottawa townhouse, luring their victims through social media, pimping them out to Johns, some who raped them, others who sent them home after realizing they were sex slaves. One of these alleged ringleaders even boasted about it on Twitter, calling her victims hoes, tweeting that she was, quote unquote, the female Bill Gates. The accused were just 15 and 16 at the time police raided that home. They found cell phones. Those cell phones had nude photos of these alleged victims, and along with the names and the phone numbers of men willing to pay for sex. These Johns were recruited from online dating websites like Lava Life, Quest. I'm joined now by former host of America's Most Wanted, John Walsh, live from New York. John, good to see you here. A lot of questions come to mind. Obviously, the first for me is that when you think of sex slavery, I don't think of ringleaders of some group being 15 and 16-year-olds. Does that help them, I don't know, lure these younger victims, gain trust?
I think you're right, Brooke. Social media can be a great tool. The internet's a wonderful, wonderful, super information highway, but it's also a dangerous place. So these younger gals have figured out how to exploit other girls. For example, I know this is in Canada, which has problems, but the United States is the #1 country that is the #1 offender in the world of sex trafficking. And we are the country that uses children for sex trafficking. Last year, for example, the FBI took down 100 pimps around the country, and they recovered over 2,000 kids that were between 13 and 14. So this is just a lower age of pimps using social networking to exploit children.
But then, John, also to hear about these alleged offenders here boasting on Twitter, and again, the power of social media as you talk about that. In all of your years here, have you ever heard of something like this?
Well, in other countries, I've done sex trafficking cases all over the world.
Yeah.
And in other cases, the pimps are younger and they exploit younger children than themselves. But this is really kind of unique. And I've got to give the police in Canada a lot of credit for going after these victims, because they'll be tried as juveniles. They may only, pay a penalty of a couple years. But it's a tough, uncomfortable subject, and I think cops are getting better at it. Who's not getting better at it are parents monitoring what their kids doing on social networking websites. That child is your responsibility until they're 18 years old. Whether they're a victim or whether they're a pimp, somebody needs to jump in here and see what these kids are doing.
Say a girl and 2 women have been rescued after being forced to work as sex slaves. Tonight, the man police say stole the victim's freedom has lost his, thanks to a vigilant sheriff's deputy. NBC4's Katie Farrell live at the Franklin County Jail, where that suspect is being held tonight. Katie?
Good evening, Mike. Tonight, that man accused of selling a girl from Youngstown and 2 women, one from Columbus and one from Georgia for sex, is behind bars here behind me. And experts tell me educating us, the public, about the warning signs is key to helping the countless others being forced into modern-day slavery. This is the man, 28-year-old Antoine D. Williams Sr. from Canal Winchester, who Columbus police say advertised his victims online for commercial sex.
Police say it all happened here at Deborah Blackman's house. She had her boyfriend and her children clear out one day so that a teenager in her custody could have sex with a drug dealer. The home is deserted now, a do not enter sign on the front door and kids' toys in the front yard. Deborah Blackman, 25 years old, is accused of sex trafficking. Police say the victim is a teenage girl who was living here and was in the legal custody and care of Blackman. A police report says Blackman was addicted to drugs and told the victim she was going through drug withdrawals. She needed a fix. So police say Blackman handed over the victim to drug dealer Tony Hammond, who, in exchange for sex with the victim, gave 5 prescription drug pills to Blackman.
That's terrible. It's terrible that somebody would do that for drugs.
They think that sex trafficking of children means a white van pulls up onto Troost Avenue, grabs a girl off, and she disappears. That is not what's happening.
They're recruited at schools. They're recruited at malls.
The more we look, the more we found.
Fox 4 News investigates. Thursday at 10.
As we come on the air at noon, the FBI is telling us agents have rescued more than 100 children from sex trafficking rings in cities across the country. Agents saying all the victims were between 13 and 16 years old. 150 accused pimps are also behind bars. The FBI saying sex trafficking with children is a prevalent problem across the country.
Is behind bars after deputies say he forced a teenage runaway into prostitution. Forsyth County deputies arrested 31-year-old Matthew Humphreys over the weekend. Deputies say Humphreys victimized a 16-year-old girl as she was involved in prostitution and sex crimes. They've now charged Humphreys with sex trafficking, interference with child custody, and contributing to the delinquency of a minor. They turned the girl over to DFAT.
The FBI rescues dozens of children, including some right here in Metro Atlanta, who were caught up in the sex trade business.
Yeah, the nationwide operation called Operation Cross Country spanned 3 days, and it led to over 100 arrests. Fox 5's Morse Diggs is live at the Atlanta FBI field office with the details for us. Morse?
Well, Atlanta leaders have a lot that they can tout that is proud and good things, positive about our city. But one thing that they're not proud about is the fact that the child sex trade continues to thrive here. So there was little doubt when agents across the street here participated in this nationwide roundup that they would recover some children.
If you want to stop all of this, stop what you're doing, stop this work.
Children are involved in illegal acts, but the FBI sees them as victims.
Hard to see her face from here, but on the ad she looks about 14.
And that is near the average age of individuals recovered in a combined sex sting operation across the country over a 3-day period. And cash, like so many unlawful activities, drives the human trafficking trade.
The most significant part of the operation is the recovery of child victims and adult victims of sex trafficking and getting them the services that they need to get out of this lifestyle.
3 minors were recovered in the Atlanta area, 58 people apprehended on prostitution-related charges. Agents raided motels and swarmed truck stops after getting intelligence about where the activity was taking place. The mid-October roundup is used in part to publicize the problem, but it is a daily danger for young people, including some under the age of 3.
This is something that we, with the Match Task Force, the FBI, and our law enforcement partners here in the Metro Atlanta area address on a day-to-day basis, 365 days a year. This 3-day event just is a small capture of the crime threat that's here locally in our community.
One big reason our area is a magnet for this activity is because of Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. Customers come here from outside the country. Also, children are brought here to participate in the trade. Live from the Atlanta FBI headquarters, I'm Morse Diggs, Fox 5 News.
Thank you, Morse.
First, a big one at that.
Yeah, it certainly was, and it touched right here close to home as well. More than 80 minors are now free from the grips of sex traffickers, and 120 people are now awaiting charges after a major bust. Let's get to Nick Monticelli joining us now live. And this bust is not only impacting the nation, but it is certainly prevalent here in Michigan and Metro Detroit as well.
Absolutely, Rhonda. Good morning to you. There were 12 minors, 12 girls that were taken away from the traffickers and rescued, and 8 traffickers were taken into custody locally. All of it thanks to those folks here inside of the FBI building here in downtown Detroit. And on top of that, there were close to 50 people that were also arrested for just trying to engage in prostitution. This is FBI video shot at one of the many locations its agents, along with local police, raided over a 4-day span in what the feds call Operation Cross Country 11.
But on the ad, she looks about 14.
Of the 84 children rescued, the average age is 15 years old, all being sold for sex, including a teenager from Russia who could barely speak English.
How did you end up coming from Russia to Denver and do this? How did that happen?
But the most sickening, agents recovered a 3-month-old baby girl and her 5-year-old sister in Colorado after a relative of theirs made a deal to sell them for sex for $600.
Same thing, close cover, shadow cover, just like we would have done here. Nothing changes. As soon as I get the apartment number from her, we'll air it out.
Here at home, the FBI and 24 other local police agencies worked the sting. They rescued 12 children. FBI Detroit Special Agent in Charge David Gelio saying, while the recovery of exploited juveniles remains our priority, the FBI will continue to work tirelessly to rescue anyone being commercially trafficked and exploited. Now, the majority of those that were caught up in the sting were caught via an online transaction trying to sell these girls online, but it also happened in some other places like hotels, motels, truck stops, even rest stops. And again, pretty shocking to hear how many people are involved, especially the young ages. But Everett and Rhonda, even more shocking is to realize that these numbers are just the tip of the iceberg.
Well, let's certainly hope that this crackdown is just the tip of the iceberg as well, and that more arrests will be made and more girls are freed. Thank you.
From downtown Detroit, Local 4 News at 11 starts now.
Our top story tonight, dozens of children rescued during a nationwide sex trafficking sting.
The FBI teamed up with at least 10 local police departments to save a dozen minors in Metro Detroit.
Mara McDonald live off the top here at 11 at the FBI field office in downtown Detroit. Mara?
Devin, let me bring you up on the stats from our portion of this nationwide sweep. You're right, 12 children rescued here in southeastern Michigan, 8 traffickers taken into custody, another 46 adults taken into custody for participating in prostitution. But I warn you, you've got to prepare yourselves to realize how young the youngest victim is in all of this. This is FBI video shot at one of the many locations its agents, along with local police, raided over a 4-day span in what the feds call Operation Cross Country 11.
Which is hard to see her face from here, but on the ad she looks about 14.
Of the 84 children rescued across the country, the average age was 15, all being sold for sex and trapped in situations well beyond their control or years, including a teenager from Russia who had minimal to no language skills.
How did you end up coming from Russia to Denver and do this? How did that happen?
But the most sickening, agents recovered a 3-month-old baby girl and her 5-year-old sister in Colorado after a relative of theirs made a deal to sell them for sex for $600 to an undercover officer.
Same thing, close cover, shadow cover, just like we would have done here. Nothing changes. As soon as I get the apartment number from her, we'll air it out.
Here at home, the FBI and 24 other local police agencies worked the sting. They rescued 12 children. FBI Detroit Special Agent in Charge David Gelio saying, while the recovery of exploited juveniles remains our priority, the FBI will continue to work tirelessly to rescue anyone being commercially trafficked and exploited. Back here live, most of those stings were set up on the internet. Most of these traffickers are shameless in, putting it out there about what they have for sale. But the stings went down, anywhere. We're talking hotels, motels, rest stops, truck stops, and even casinos. Kimberly, Devin, back to you.
It is just incomprehensible. You talk about people selling their own family members. Mara, what now happens to all of these children that have been wrapped up in this?
Well, they've got, dozens of them nationally. The FBI has a special victims unit that handles children who are in these circumstances, and not just mentally or emotionally, like they provide basic necessities, food, shelter, and everything else, and they move them into social services to try and get them out of this so they never return.
Just horrific.